Good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
Streaming in. Welcome. We're going to give it just a minute or so and let everybody come streaming in. And we are recording. So y'all know, make sure you're muted though, and you won't be in the recording. So although you can unmute when the time comes, but I'm glad you're here. All right, so if we'll give it just a couple more seconds to get everybody in. I think just about everyone who's here is in right now. Let's see. All right, good. Welcome. Good morning. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Wittenberg. I'm the Executive Director of Third Place Commons, which, as many of you know, is a community-supported nonprofit located in Lake Forest Park. And we're next to, not the same as Third Place Books, but we're next to Third Place Books. Third Place Commons hosts hundreds of free events each year, and during the pandemic, some of them have been virtual, like today's event, and many are also happening in person, like our live music and dancing every Friday and Saturday night. And it is my honor to welcome you to today's town hall on building climate resiliency. I'm really delighted that you're all here. And if you've attended our virtual events before, you know that this is usually the part where we often sort of tell you about lots of upcoming events. But today I want to keep the focus on our program. So the only event I want to mention today is the Lake Forest Park Farmers Market, which does open for the season, as always, on Mother's Day, which is May 8th this year. And if you're concerned about reducing your carbon footprint and negative impacts on the land, the farmers market is a great place to shop green. So I encourage you to come down and join us for that. I also want to note that we are recording today, but the recordings will only pick up people who are speaking. So as long as you're muted during the program, you will not be in the recordings, even if you're on camera. So no need to hide if you don't want to. And with that, I just want to say welcome once again. Hope you have a great enjoy the program with us. And I'm going to turn things over to our MC for the day, Brian Saunders.
Thank you, Amy, and welcome everybody. In fact, I'll welcome you with a Feliz Dia de la Tierra, which means Happy Earth Day, which of course it's the day after Earth Day, but that's okay. We can still call it the Earth Weekend. And we're here to celebrate the second of our Town Hall Climate Action Zoom meets. And it's a privilege before we get started with the amazing lineup that we have of guest speakers and workshops and topics to present. I would like to welcome Mayor Jeff Johnson. Mayor Jeff Johnson is, of course, a stalwart for our ecological preservation of Lake Forest Park. So welcome, Mayor Johnson.
Thank you very much. Good morning and welcome to the Lake Forest Park Climate Town Hall. It's great to see so many of you here this morning, but in truth, I wish it was all of Lake Forest Park. I believe that education will be the biggest factor on moving climate resiliency forward. I have quite a few of my council members here with us today, and with their help, we will begin steps for the city to move forward and do our part to help. I have asked my public works director to look into electric mowers, weed eaters, blowers, etc., to start the changeover, and would like to include that in my upcoming budget. I realize the city needs to be an example. I realize it's a small step, but we are already looking into our auto fleet replacement schedule for the future. As mayor, my job is to keep this city financially stable and to keep core responsibilities moving. This may bring me to my last point. All of us are working for the same goal, but it's not cheap. I asked Representative Duerr and all representatives to remember smaller cities need help financially to do our part. I look forward to working with our new Climate Action Committee, and as usual, I've always said a bunch of times, we are so blessed and lucky to have some amazing people. The Climate Committee is the same thing. It's full of really, really good people. We look forward to working with you. I hope you guys have a really good day, and thanks again for being here. And remember, tell your friends, we need everybody involved. So with that, I'll let you guys move on and do your thing. So have a great day, people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Johnson. And with that, I'd like to begin today. Before I introduce our first guest speaker, I wanted to just kind of give us a little introduction about what it means to have a climate town hall of building climate resiliency, because we've all been inundated every time we turn on the news, every time we turn on the TV or listen to the radio, of these incredible disasters that are taking place, most likely caused by climate change, or at least exacerbated by climate change. But that is not what this conference is about, because we've learned about these things. We know about these things. There's more about resiliency and adaptiveness, how we can move forward, how we can get rid of the paralyzing effects that climate change can often have on people. And there's no place better on earth to see that kind of resiliency and adaptiveness than perhaps here in Pripyat, which is just that little town outside Chernobyl. Now, I know many people might look at this picture and maybe have a foreboding, a doom and gloom outlook of where we're heading. But to me, I look at this picture and I'm amazed by the resiliency and the way that nature has come back and reclaimed, even after an incredible disaster of radiating this area with incredibly toxic levels. If they can do that, if we give it just that much chance and it still has that ability to come back, surely we can do something for this climate that we're heading into today. And the fantastic news is that we don't need to go out there and look for solutions. Solutions are there. We know how we can stop producing carbon emissions through burning fossil fuels. We have all of the tools. We just need to implement them. We need to demand policy change. And people are demanding this all over the world. It's not just the United States. It's not just here in Lake Forest Park. There's Santiago, Chile. They're having rallies in Europe, across Asia, in Malaysia. It's everywhere. Everybody is telling policymakers, we need a change. We need a difference. We need to start thinking about our future, and in particular about the youth and how they're going to be adaptive. And my gosh, if companies such as Walmart can start moving in a direction where they start de-investing in fossil fuels and they start investing in renewable energies, Walmart has pledged to produce a gigaton of energy by 2030 with solar panels and other renewable energies. And guess what? They're going to get there before 2030. So we can see that big corporations, they want to make changes. They don't need policymakers to tell them, but we need policymakers to help us move forward. And there's amazing new nonprofit organizations that are really wonderfully doing some great work. There's some nonprofits working with communities to help them adapt. There's a managed retreat, which I'm not a big fancy name of, but it's basically telling people how they can mitigate the effects of climate change, move into areas that are going to be less susceptible to the damages of climate change. And as Mayor Johnson mentioned, here in our little corner of the world, we are also starting to plan for climate change. We formed an action committee that I'm a proud member of, and I can tell you the people on that panel are amazing. We're in great hands, but we're going to need a lot of help from everybody, not just the people on the panel. So it's going to be exciting times. And we don't need to think about making changes on such a grandiose global scale. Little things that we do locally are huge. They have an incredible effect. And I'm reminded of one of the things that happened not too long ago that really made me recognize these small changes and how we can make some differences. Is there's a group of people in Lake Forest Park called the Stream Keepers, and they coordinate with Lake Forest Park Stewardship Foundation. And we have been analyzing the urban creeks within our area, Macular Creek and Lion Creek, for their biological health and their chemical health. And what we have found is not great news. We have found that these creeks are below average. You can see the box plot scores up in the top there, which compares Macular and Lion Creek to a more pristine creek, which is found, French Creek, which is found up in north of here in Snohomish County. And you can see that our overall health scores are average to below average, not great. And we can see that maybe climate change has got something to do with it, because we've been analyzing the temperatures of these creeks, and their averages have gone up significantly over the last 30 years. So maybe that's part of the reason. But we still must have hope, because when we think about all of these dots here represent different creeks and streams that are being analyzed for their biological health. And red means very bad. Red means almost on the verge of disaster. Orange is somewhat bad, yellow being average, and green being really good, or good to excellent. And we can see that most of Seattle and most of Kirkland area, they're in trouble. There's a lot of streams that are not in very good shape. But up here in the northern Lake Washington area, here we have our little corner of Lake Forest Park, and our creeks are, there's a couple places that are in trouble, but for the most part, we're doing fairly well. We have the ability to revive and restore these creeks. If we give nature a chance, it will respond. And in our last sampling in October, we found a species that I'd like to introduce everybody to, called Sen Nigmela. And Sen Nigmela is a species that has never been found in our creeks over the 20 to 30 years that we have been sampling it. And it is a species that is only found in very non-polluted, excellent, good to excellent quality streams. And guess what? The sampling site that we found this species was just down creek from a major overpass project we did on 178th, where we widened the creek, we made it flow more naturally. Now, is this species there because of that smart policy we made? Well, maybe not. Maybe it's just coincidental. But to me, it offers up that resiliency and hope that we can continue to make smart policy changes. We can elect officials that are going to think ecologically like we do. And we can demand that we protect these valuable resources, because the restoration of these valuable resources will be the restoration and the health of our own personal lives. So with that, I would like to now welcome our first of our speakers. And that first of our speakers is, Representative Dvina Duerr. She is an American politician and an architect with a minor in environmental geography. In 2019, she was appointed to serve as a member of the Washington State House of Representatives for District 1. And prior to being elected to her current position, she also served on the Bothell City Council for 3 years. She is a member of the Democratic Party, and she is going to give us an update on the climate action in 2022 legislation session. Representative Duerr, I bid you Sen Nigmela and welcome.
No.
Do we have Representative Duerr here? Maybe we don't have Representative Duerr here.
Let's do a little tap dance.
She mentioned that she's in the meeting, in the middle of a retreat.
Yeah, she was here earlier, and then she had in the pre-show, and then she had to step away because she was in the middle of a retreat. Can we change the order at all? Is that feasible? I don't know how feasible that is.
I think we could probably go ahead with our next speaker, if that's something that is doable.
I don't know.
We don't want to throw her off. Yeah, she may have a
Ray.
limited availability.
That's true.
Is there anybody who can contact her?
I'll try.
Okay. Well, how's everybody doing?
I suppose that
Could Heather Price go?
Did Heather Price go?
I'm sorry, were you introducing me?
Or Sarah?
I'm so sorry. I thought somebody else was speaking. I had to quickly run to the bathroom.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, let's.
How about,
We're
do you
missing.
want to,
I'm ready.
Kim, can you put the screen with the program for today up? That'll give us a second, because we didn't talk about the program. Maybe we could just have a look at that. And that will help think about if we want to change up the order, but also give everybody a chance to see what's to come.
It sounds like Sarah's ready to go. So why don't I introduce her and we can start
Okay.
with that.
Yep,
Okay.
sorry, I saw there's no speaker and I was like, I gotta go, so I'm gonna be right back,
Okay.
but I'm here, I'm
Perfect.
ready. Thank you, sorry.
Yeah,
Awesome.
so let me go ahead and introduce Sarah Jaquette Ray. She is an author of A Field Guide to Climate Anxiety, How to Keep Your Cool on a Warming Planet, and she is currently a professor at Humboldt State University. Dr. Ray received a bachelor's in art in religious studies with a minor in women's studies from Swarthmore College, excuse me, and a Master of Arts in American Studies from the University of Texas. She completed her doctoral studies at the University of Oregon in the environmental sciences and studies and policy. And after becoming interested in social justice aspects of environmental issues. So Dr. Ray, welcome and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Brian, and thanks so much to the Lake Forest Park Stewardship Foundation for organizing this and for everyone for coming and for the perfect timing of allowing me to have a bio break right before my talk. And I know I have about 20 minutes to talk. I do have some slides to share, but I just wanted to introduce or sort of warm us up to the concept of climate emotions as necessary for all this work that everybody has been describing in these introductory comments, from the mayor to what Brian was talking about, the Sen Nigmela. I'm determined to get that. I kept looking at
Nigmela, that's right.
Nigmela. It's my new favorite species, now replacing krill, because of course these are not charismatic megafauna, and I think some of them are so cute. So anyway, glad to learn about the Sen Nigmela today. And the thing that brought me to the topic of climate emotions and that I'm going to speak to you about today and try to make a case for centering climate emotions to you all today and maybe give some tips to combat some of our common pitfalls that we fall into that are really emotional switches and seeds we can plant that we may not realize are emotional. We think of them as reality or truth, is that my focus had been on environmental justice, and my background is in the environmental humanities. I have a PhD in environmental literature. I'm a big fan of all things, textual related to the natural world and specifically environmental justice literature. So that was my background, and that was what I spent my time doing. About, I would say somewhere around 10 years ago, maybe a little bit less, I realized that my students, as they were learning all this information about the environmental crisis, which had been sort of a boutique interest for the rare tree hugger in the class, in college, was becoming explosive on a sort of level, a scale that I hadn't seen before, and among a much more diverse group of students, and that students were coming into college classrooms with a much more intense sense of despair and doom about how bad things were. And then I was just making matters worse, putting fuel on the fire, so to speak, by telling them how complicit they were in all of the disasters and awful things that were happening around the world, just purely by being an American. And this, of course, I started to realize that their emotional ability to handle how bad the problems were was a barrier, and I wanted to investigate that. Where was that coming from? Were they just snowflakes? You have a wonderful professor just around the road at UW-Bothell, Jennifer Atkinson, who's a colleague of mine, who made front page of the Seattle Times when she taught her course on environmental depression. And she and I were sort of investigating this question at the same time, and now we're working on a book together actually on this and several other projects. But there was sort of a clear moment where many educators in the environmental field from K through 12 and college, and I'm talking to all of them all the time, are saying, what do we need in this moment? Something different is happening. Young people are in a different moment. The old way of doing things, of kind of rattling the cage to get everybody afraid and maybe they'll then figure out what to do, is no longer really working. And in fact, it's backfiring. And so I wanted to investigate that. I wanted to figure out what was the emotional outcomes that we needed to be teaching in our classes, not just the content related outcomes or the technological outcomes that so often occupy most environmental education spaces. Like, how do we solve these problems? Tends to answer, we answer those questions with things like, this better technology, this better policy, this better form of measuring the Sen Nigmela, habitat or whatever. And I was thinking maybe there's actually something even deeper than that at the level of the cells of the human being. The chemistry that's flowing through our brains, what neuroscientists are always thinking about, and that would really have a significant role in what we're doing with the climate. And so I started to focus on that. The vast majority of what I think about is about reframing the problem. And so I really quickly want to just draw your attention to my yesterday most recent piece. I'm putting it in the chat. On KCT, overwhelmed by climate change, try reframing your impact. And so much of what I'm offering in my book and in my talk today has to do with changing the story that we live in to then reshape the emotional approach that, the emotional tools we have at our disposal to engage this work. Okay, so with that, I'm going to get started. These are my students teaching me how to do things better, as always. This notion that they are the students and I'm the teacher, anybody who's a teacher knows, is a myth. And so I'm going to start sharing my screen, and I want to honor my students. Also, I wanted to mention that I'm coming to you from Arcata, California, which is sort of the Pacific Northwest. I like to think of it as the Pacific Northwest. I did my PhD in Oregon and lived in Juneau, Alaska for some time. So this is about as far south as I've been in some time. And so I'm with you all in the Pacific Northwest, but I'm on Wiyot territory, and I want to honor the millennia, time immemorial work that the Wiyot and the many indigenous communities in this area have done to make this space such a fantastic place to do environmental work. And I'm honored all the time that I get to breathe such clean air and have such beauty around me and such functioning ecosystems. We have a lot of work to do, but they're pretty good, and I appreciate that. Okay, so here come my slides. Okay, so just a real quick dance through the fact that climate anxiety and emotions around the climate and environmental problems are becoming more and more studied and a topic of conversation. And I think that's really cool. 2017, the APA published this piece that was sort of the first thing to raise the alarm about, especially people who were studying climate change and studying things like biodiversity loss, the emotional toll that was taking on them. And also, things like climate trauma and increased heat waves and increased weather events, what the mental health impacts of that were going to be. In the clinicians category in the sort of psychology world, Leslie Davenport produced this fantastic book I highly recommend, Emotional Resiliency in the Era of Climate Change. And that was the first time, or one of the biggest ways that psychologists were starting to think about climate change as something that was happening on the couch, so to speak. Philosopher Glenn Albrecht has approached the issue of climate anxiety and emotions from a philosopher's perspective, which I really appreciate, because as a person who's not a psychologist and who's a humanities scholar, I love the thought of coming at these questions of emotions from all these different perspectives. Basically argues in this fantastic book, and I recommend you look up his website and look at interviews with him, that the words that we have to describe our emotions do not adequately encompass the relationships between human beings and the natural world. And so the lack of language we have around those, we don't have words. The word anxiety, even climate anxiety, doesn't capture it. He comes up with all kinds of new words like solastalgia to describe the particular type of mourning and loss that we experience with relationship to the environment we live in. And once we have better words for this, his argument is we could have better politics, right? We can actually solve some of these environmental problems. Another just example of climate anxiety, more in pop culture, we've got our very first ever climate suicide. David Buckell was a human rights lawyer in New York who immolated himself using gasoline. And in his suicide note, he wrote, "This is a metaphor for what humanity is doing to themselves with fossil fuels." And this hit front page and really brought the mental health questions of climate change into the fore. On the other side of the spectrum, we have people on the front lines like Pacific Islanders who are not just fighting against climate change, but are fighting against the narrative that climate change apocalypse is inevitable. And I'm going to come back to that over and over again, that if we think of the climate change apocalypse being inevitable, which is what the dominant story about climate change is telling us, it turns out psychologists show us, and there's really cool research on this, I'll talk about it, hopefully I'll get to it, that story itself makes us want to try to fix the problem much less. And so the narrative of inevitability is not just a matter of our own psychological ability to wake up in the morning and get to work, but it also consigns people on the front lines to inevitable doom, right? Sort of the vanishing Indian trope, that we are not drowning, as the inevitable story about of climate change would say. We are fighting, right? So every single little bit of carbon dioxide and emissions we don't put in the air actually has an impact on somebody's life, if not a human person, a more than human person. The Sen Nigmela, for example. I'm gonna get it, Brian, I'm gonna get it. Many of you have maybe watched this film, which I think is the first big film that really navigated the emotional journey of how important it is to get past despair and move into something like resilience. And hope maybe too not the right word for it. In this film, he really talks about resilience, and I think that there's a worthwhile conversation we have about that. Of course, there's Chris Jordan, the filmmaker for the film about the Midway albatross that are swallowing all the microplastics and plastics in the ocean and dying. And he has all these pictures of the dead skeletons of the albatross with the plastic in their stomachs, really evocative of the Anthropocene, this sort of moment where humans have sort of invaded nature in an irreparable way. And he experienced severe depression and anxiety and shut completely down after that film. And his story, he's come out with that story and really focus on emotion as a key aspect of our battle with climate change. If you watch Big Little Lies, you will know that the 8-year-old character of Laura Dern's daughter had started fainting because of what the doctor in the hospital diagnosed as climate anxiety. And this was the sort of first moment where we see Hollywood taking on climate anxiety and the question of youth and childhood development and ACEs and trauma in a new way, which I want to get to. The most recent study you may be familiar with, and I will turn to youth in a moment here. I'm particularly interested in college age students, but I talk with and have a lot of colleagues. Heather Price, who will talk to me after me, has access to a lot of this research too. But in 2021, a huge study was produced in The Lancet by a bunch of my colleagues, Britt Ray and Caroline Hickman, Jennifer Nchendu, Panu Pikala in Finland, who studied 10,000 young people around the world and identified the prevalence of climate anxiety among youth in the world. And at the same time, a big Pew Research Institute study came out reinforcing this data that young people experience climate anxiety and were more worried about climate change than any other generation. They're also in America, the biggest generation we've ever had. They're the most ethnically diverse generation we've ever had. And they're also the least likely to be as well off as their parents economically than any generation we've ever had. There's some really unique qualities of Generation Z that I spent a lot of time thinking about in my book. I won't get too much into that today. But so the punchline is all these studies are coming out about climate change's effects on mental health. And there's a long list. You can, if any of these are particularly interesting, go research it yourself. It's fantastic stuff. But what I'm even more interested in is a less spoken story about the vice versa, right? Like how much we need mental health in order to address climate change. And so I'll get to that in a minute. So here's why, right? The neuroscience of acute and chronic stress, and anybody who studies psychology and neuroscience, this will be familiar to them. But when I started learning this stuff only a few years ago, I really wish that I had been taught this when I was young. So early and often I put this out there. We have a range of resilience, what Dan Siegel calls a window of tolerance, where when we are in that zone of our mental state, we are able to act wisely in service of things that we care a lot about, like our family, community, the climate, etc. When we are not in that state, we do not tend to make decisions in service of the things that we care about. And so it's really critical for climate change and all the things we care about that we are, as much as we can, maintaining and cultivating this range of resilience in our lives. This is why, you know, I say our front lines of climate change, our front lines of everything we care about is actually our bodies. You know, the sort of notion that we can wait to take care of ourselves until after the revolution or after climate change is fixed, we just burn the midnight oil until it's fixed, is a myth I'm really trying to push against. And I think the urgency of climate change really makes a lot of people, especially young people, go down this path of destruction. And of course, I don't need to tell you all, but the mental health physical health binary that dominant medical model suggests, and the way I was raised, that what's happening in my mind has nothing to do with my body and vice versa, is in fact false. And of course, chronic stress and ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, any kinds of trauma like COVID, climate change is included in that, certainly abuse when one is a child, especially at a young age. This sort of instability of life, the inability to control the conditions of your safety, has physical effects over the long term. The research is coming out about, even epigenetics research about trauma that you've never experienced yourself, and in mice that have whose ancestors have experienced trauma around the smell of candy will actually have traumatic triggers in response to candy. We see this also in human beings as well. And I want to add climate, make sure we're focusing on climate as a kind of trauma. And so we often think about this notion that, another way of thinking about all of this is that climate disruption, on the left, we see these red boxes over here in the reactivity category, climate disruption in the middle, kicking off this kind of sequence of feedback loop of negative things happening. We have climate-induced reactivity in ourselves. That makes us not have good, we can't make our institutions run very well. And we're burning out, so to speak. I'm feeling this happen in my own job. I don't know about the rest of you all, but this diminishes our ability to mitigate climate change, which in effect increases climate disruption, of course, right? And the ideal is, if we think about how necessary it is for our mental health to be part of the climate story, we look to the right here around resilience, we see climate disruption maybe kicking off this opportunity for something like life-affirming worldviews taking over the destruction we had before. This sort of way COVID kind of offered this opportunity for us to rethink this existing systems. Maybe we're in a womb and not a tomb, and it's time to kick off this other cycle where our mental health increases our ability to mitigate climate change and thereby decreases climate disruption. So this to me feels like the best visual to make the argument I'm trying to make here. But don't trust my awesome graph, trust a 22-year-old Morgan Florsheim, who wrote in her beautiful essay the exact same argument, but in more of a personal memoir format. Depression tells us that we are once powerless and culpable, which is a bind, right? We can't do both. And therefore, the only logical response is to disengage, turn inward, eschew connection. A response which only serves to reinforce the oppressive systems like racial injustice and capitalism that are truly responsible for our suffering. So the cycle I just described on the left, the reactivity cycle, she's describing here. And I think that it's a really poignant point that eschewing connection is actually really the thing. The lack of connection, the severed connections between human beings and each other, between human beings and the natural world, that really kicked off with colonialism. The Enlightenment really pushed it to the next level, and it manifests in all of our institutions. But that disconnection is at the root cause of climate change. It's also at the root cause of our mental health problems. And so really, if we want to have one silver bullet, let's go with connection. So what does this have to do with young people? How is this a story about youth? The Lancet report, again, I want to just focus in a little bit on some of those findings. In that report, they found that nearly 60% of the 10,000 16 to 25-year-olds from 8 countries interviewed in spring 2021 felt that they felt very worried or extremely worried about climate change. More than 45% of those questions said feelings about the climate affected their daily lives. 3/4 of them said that the future was frightening, and over half say they think humanity is doomed. 1 in 4 don't want to have children. And this is not because of the old environmentalist reason of sort of zero population growth. This has to do with because they do not think that their children are going to live in an inhabitable planet. That's a very different existential situation. So where did I start to see this in my students? They were coming into my class saying things like there's no good that they can do for the planet, only impact. And they would get this reinforced by exercises they do in classes. And maybe some of you have done this, like the ecological footprint exercise. They got the message from all kinds of places that all of humanity sucks. Karen Litfin, also in your neck of the woods, calls this a misanthropic temptation. The critical one, which many of us feel I spend most of my time talking about, is that the problems are too big and people are too small and powerless to fix them. And this is really a problem of the framing of the problem and the framing of ourselves as powerless. And so I spend a lot of my time tackling both of those things in my book and in everything else I right, because this seems to be the big one that stops us, right? This is where everyone goes into kind of apathy or denial. We're past the point of no return, and this goes to things like a timeline around climate change action. Kari Norgaard, also in the Northwest, sociologist at U of O, has learned in her studies that it's easier for most Americans to imagine the apocalypse than a post-fossil fuel society. And so this lack of the imagination of a future we might desire is really at the core of some of this, of the difficulty of waking up in the morning working on it. Their life course is unclear. They won't be like previous generations. So this notion that they'll have children, get jobs, get married, they'll retire, whatever, they feel like that's all off the table. Many of them think it's cruel to bring children into this world. Many of them go even further. I'd say that suicide and suicide ideation in young people is on the rise. We see that in all the mental health data. And given what we've seen in the last couple of years in the research on youth and climate anxiety, we need to add the climate as a cause of that, climate change as a real situation with young people's mental health. And they feel other emotions too that we could categorize underneath the category of climate anxiety, which is like betrayal and resentment and anger for previous generations' actions. So in response to that list of ways that my students were presenting, I wanted to write a book for them that basically solved the problems, but of course can't solve climate change, but at least help them get empowered to engage with climate change. And so I kind of looked at all of the ways they're presented and say, okay, what can we do to address each of one of those things and help them get into a headspace and an emotional space that they could actually keep this work going for their lives. This is not just a marathon, it's a sprint. They're going to be doing climate work for their lives. Figuring out how to embrace life in the Anthropocene, getting schooled on the role of emotions in climate justice work. And we know that the head and the hand are not the only things involved in any kind of successful activism, but that the heart is also essential to that work. Cultivating climate wisdom. This has to do with realizing that, our prefrontal cortexes are really important, and how do we keep those really healthy, and our vagus system keep really toned. Chemistry in our body, how do we keep that dialed in as much as we possibly can, given all the traumas and causes and conditions that create the situation that we're in right now. Oh, excuse me. Whoops. Sorry about that. Claiming your calling and scale your action. This is my students' favorite chapter because this is the one that really helps them see themselves as empowered. Hacking the story has to do with what I've talked about, this notion that if we think the problem is too big and we're too small, we're less likely to do anything about it. Hack the Story is a chapter that deals with that we simply must live in a story where the great turning, as Joanna Macy calls it, or what Adrienne Marie Brown calls the emergent strategy, or Paul Hawken refers to as the blessed unrest, that there's just a groundswell of tons of people that we're plugged into who are doing this work. And that's a very different story to live in that gives us a sense of eudaimonia and purpose. We don't have to, happiness isn't the end game, even hope isn't the end game, but living in a story where we're all working on towards this goal of making the world we desire actually turns out to be much more fulfilling and necessary for mental health. Be less right and more in relation speaks to the culture wars that we're in and the difficulty of violent communication and the politics of outrage in getting climate work done. And ditching guilt, moving beyond hope, and laughing more. Here I really take on the mainstream environmental movement for being a real doom and gloom depressing kind of a movement, and the current trading in a currency of deprivation and sacrifice and misery and depression and guilt, instead of in emotions that actually make people keep coming back for more and wanting to join the movement. And I'm not suggesting we all be Pollyanna about the fate of the world. I'm saying that we protect joy and hope in a fierce way, what Christiana Figueres calls greedy optimism, those kinds of things. And resisting burnout, we all know we need a little bit of that, but I'm speaking here to the people who feel like they're off the hook from resisting burnout because they need to burn out even more than most people, which is climate activists, of course. And feeding what you want to grow. We spend 85% of our media that we consume is climate in the negative frame. If you add that to the negativity bias in our own brains, neuroscientists talk about the negativity bias in our reptilian brains, is a recipe for disaster for living in a story of apocalypse. And so my first step when I'm in a moment of despair is looking around, what else is true? What is thriving in my life? What do I want to be bigger? What is that anxiety and fear telling me is under a threat that I love, right? And using the thing that I love, that I want to grow, as my compass for action, rather than fear of something that I want to avoid. So those are the chapters of my book, trying to deal with what students are going through, and maybe some of you too. I just really love Gus Speth's quote here, where he turns our attention away from science and technology and kind of top down, solutions, and really to a spiritual and emotional transformation in humanity. He writes, I used to think that the top global environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that with 30 years of good science, we could address these problems, but I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. And to their credit, scientists are trying to learn how to do that. I see many of them all over the place, realizing how central their own trauma and anxiety is to their work, and helping us learn how to do that too. So really, this is a call for a wide range of people's skills, wisdom, traditions, arts, all kinds of things in the work on climate change. So what is the sort of checklist for cultivating climate resilience? Are you personally resourced? If you're resourced and your cup is full, you're able to weigh pros and cons rationally and act in service of your mission and values. And I won't go into the key concepts, but if you're a geeky nerd like me, you want to look up some of the psychological concepts and put them underneath each of these. Do you feel you have control over some conditions of your lives? Investigate your grief and anxiety, because it points to what you love and what you fear is under threat. So start there. Feed what you want to grow. Those are the conditions you do have control over. Are you living in a story of resilience and progress, or are you living in a story of decline, unraveling, and apocalypse? The story you live in is a self-fulfilling prophecy, and the psychologists will show you that. Are you aware that you aren't acting alone and that you're supported and surrounded by community? In the individualistic fetish society of America, this is probably the number one thing that is the cause of all of these connected problems, if you want to get down to a root cause. And I think COVID really revealed this in stark relief. That's the one silver lining of COVID, that we've realized how necessary community and social relations are to our ability to co-regulate, to have our window of tolerance in check, and to know that we can take a nap when we need to make sure we don't burn out because we're not working alone. Are you visioning what you want? What kinds of collective structures of mutual support do you want instead? What future do you desire? What do you desire about your future? And I think whenever I do this exercise with students where I ask, what do you think of in the future? What's one word? And all the words that come up are really, really awful. Uncertainty, disaster, crisis, apocalypse, all these words come up in the chat. And I think, well, what do they desire about this future? Who wants this future? And so we need to actively cultivate what we desire, or else there's really no hope for building it. And that's the end of my talk. I know I probably went a little bit over time. I'm really sorry. I wanted to highlight Robin Wall Kimmerer's beautiful quote here to end on some of these words. Even a wounded world is feeding us. Even a wounded world holds us, giving us moments of wonder and joy. I choose joy over despair, not because I have my head in the sand, but because joy is what the earth gives me daily, and I must return the gift. This is a very different argument for why we should cultivate joy and pleasure and get eudaimonia from the work that we're doing. It's not about cruel optimism or denial or being Pollyanna. It's about giving Earth the gift back that it's giving us. Bayoka Malafe also writes, these times are urgent. Let us slow down. And I think slowing down as a sort of metaphor for what we need to do with climate change, given the urgency of climate change discourse, is one of the real insights I want to leave you with today. So what would that mean for you? And thank you so much for having me today. And I wish you the best for your big day of work today.
Well, we do have a few moments. I forgot to mention, people, that if you have a question for Sarah Ray, you can type it in the chat, and maybe Sarah Phillips, you can help me if anything comes through. I'll start off with a question, because having read your book, Sarah, I was really struck by one of the things you said about how the youth today they have more information at their fingertips, and yet they feel the most powerless and alone. And I was wondering if you might want to just talk briefly about how the youth can avoid getting overstimulated by all what's sort of on the internet and so forth.
Yeah, I think that one of my favorite books that got me to have a major aha about this is Jenny Odell's book, How to Do Nothing. I recommend it. It's not really about how to do nothing, obviously, but it connects where we put our attention on a daily basis down to the sort of microcosmic level of how much time I spend scrolling on whatever site to the great global climate crisis. And I think that sort of dizzying scale of the microcosm of where my eyeballs go just in this moment, how that relates to the global climate crisis is really important for young people. That's the Cultivate Climate Wisdom chapter I have about where our attention is. That's where our energy goes, where our mind goes, our energy flows, or whatever, you can think about the good and bad wolf that we feed, or Adrienne Brown writes, feed what you want to grow, as in my last chapter. This notion of where our attention goes, where our eyeballs go, as they call it, getting eyeballs in social media, those things create realities, quite literally and materially. And so when young people realize how critical their attention is and what they're focusing attention on, how that creates an ecosystem of a story that they're living in, that then dictates how they can act and what possibilities are even available to them, they start to create their own media diets, so to speak, and so that kind of self-discipline around what we consume, what kinds of things we give our eyeballs to, where we're giving our attention, how that turns into dollars for other people and further harm for the environment down various different chains. That's a really critical insight for young people, because doom scrolling feels like you're doing something right. You're participating, your collectivism, right? You're having this kind of witnessing of the problems somehow makes you a better citizen, or makes you feel like you're doing something about it. But it, in fact, actually undermines our ability to do things about it. And so I would propose for young people, and for the rest of us, myself included, what if it turns out that our attention to those things actually doesn't serve those things? And it's a counterintuitive insight. But yes, 24/7 news cycle coming from all corners of the globe about how terrible everything is, because news media has to cover what bleeds, right? What bleeds leads, right? So the negativity bias of our attention gets reproduced in the supply-demand relationship of media. And so that's what media gives us. And we don't need to participate in that.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Sarah, I'm getting a message that we do now have a Representative Duerr, and then she has a very brief moment. If you have questions for Sarah Ray, I know she's going to stick around for a little bit, so maybe we can have those questions answered in just a bit. So with that, yeah, thank you so much. What a wonderful speak. Let's go ahead and now have, if Representative Duerr is there, that she can go ahead and take over.
I am so sorry. I'm double booked, and it's madness, actually. I'm going to share my screen and try to do this brief presentation. Thank you so much for inviting me. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Okay, I've never done this before, so here we go. Can everyone see my screen? I can't see the nodding, so.
No, we can't see your screen.
You can't, okay. You know what, I'm gonna skip that because it's just pictures anyway. So thank you for inviting me. I am Dvina Doerr from the 1st District, soon to be your district. And I am on the House Energy and Environment Committee. I'm the vice chair there. Most of my work that I do in the legislature is around environmental work. I've been in the legislature since 2019 and have managed to pass a few bills that I'm really proud of. So my first session, I passed a bill called CPACER, which is a loaning mechanism that allows commercial building owners to get loans for their buildings that travel with the building and not with the owner. And what that does is really incentivize owners who don't typically own their commercial buildings for very long to get in there and make substantive conservation measures on their buildings. So that was my first session. And this session, I'm sure we all remember the heat dome from last summer, and really the first IPCC report that I paid any attention to, where it said our only chance of staying at or below 1.5 degrees Celsius was to really tackle methane, because methane is in its first 10 years in the atmosphere about 100 times more lethal for warming than carbon dioxide. And so I spent my last interim doing a lot of work researching what the sources of methane are in Washington state. And we're really lucky because we don't have a lot of fossil fuel infrastructure, which is typically the largest source of methane. But what we do have in Washington state we do have pipelines that leak. We have landfills. We have wastewater treatment plants and a large number of dairies. So wanting to get at the lowest hanging fruit that I could imagine in a session, I concentrated on landfill methane and really requiring landfills to capture and collect their methane and either flare it, which has a 99.95 destruction efficiency, and it becomes CO2, or they can capture it and turn it into, oftentimes on site, which they do at Cedar River landfill, is they use it on site for heating and electricity. And then now that we've passed the low carbon fuel standard, businesses can come in, clean the methane, and use it for renewable natural gas. So we modeled the legislation on bills that passed in California and Oregon, and we managed to actually get it passed in 1 year, which is a miracle. It's really a miracle. The bill passed, and one of the scientists who testified on the bill said that it was the equivalent of pulling 70,000 cars off the road. I've heard other numbers, 320,000. I'll take it. I will take it. So the bill right now is in rulemaking. So the rulemaking will happen over the course of 2.5 years, and then implementation will start. So it's still 5 years off, which is way too long, but that's what we were able to accomplish. So that's my biggest bill that passed this year. I'm sure a lot of you heard about 1770, which was to require the Building Code Council to do a REACH code, a residential REACH code. That did not pass. I have another bill that I've been working on embodied carbon, which is the bill actually is just created. We've already started to create, we got money to create a database to collect embodied carbon and EPF information on structural materials, so steel, concrete, and wood. That work has begun, but I've not been able to pass the bill to mandate that the state do that for all of their projects of a certain size. So while the database is being created, we're still only working off pilot projects. There's a lot of industry movement against the bill, which it's just a reporting bill, so it's kind of confounding and frustrating, but nevertheless, there we are. And then I would say my signature bill, which is maybe the most influential bill that never passed, was 1099. And what that does is add the climate change element to our Growth Management Act. I'm really proud of the work. We had a lot of support from anywhere from PTAs to Washington cities. The business community was neutral. Environmental groups, of course, were very excited, and it came within 2 hours of passing on sine die. It was just absolutely heartbreaking, but the work continues. We had already gotten funding for Commerce to begin the work to provide a menu of options for cities to choose from to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and vehicle miles traveled. That's the piece that pertains to the 10 largest counties and cities within those counties. There's another element of the bill that will have Commerce develop a model code around resiliency, and that's required of all cities and counties. Basically, it exempts cities under 6,000 and counties under 20,000. But that's to provide that cities must plan around landslides and floods and wildfire, all the things that we know are exacerbated by climate change. So we stopped building in those areas because we're all paying the price of having to replace infrastructure or our insurance premiums, all of that. It's just not smart. And then I would say the other really big piece of 1099 is getting at environmental justice and requiring cities to look at the health disparities map, which the Department of Health has created, so that we're planning it. When we're planning, we're not exacerbating the impact on overburdened communities, historically overburdened communities. So while heartbreaking, I'm really proud of the legislation, and comp plans are beginning in 20. I think the first round are due at the end of 2024, which means planning is starting now. So the timing's not great, even if I pass it next year, but there are cities and counties that are already planning to implement 1099 in their comp plan updates. Bothell voted last week to do so. I know King County is planning to do so. Redmond and Issaquah have expressed that they're interested in doing so. And in fact, I was just told that Snohomish County, Pierce, and King County have sent a resolution, or are working on a resolution asking the governors to convene a special session for 1099 to pass it. The odds are very, very slim, but it tells you how much interest cities and counties have in doing the work. They want to do the work. And we do have funding. We have $2.3 million for the first cities and counties in the update cycle for implementing voluntarily the provisions in 1099. So there are applications that will be going out soon for cities and counties to fill out, and then the money could start flowing as soon as July. So I'm very heartened by that, because it was a crushing blow. And so I'm trying to maintain the mantra: do what you can to get your outcome. But if you don't get your outcome, sometimes the universe has better plans. That's what I'm trying to tell myself. I'm sorry, I'm so rushed. I've got a lot of things going on in my head. So moving forward, I mean, there are a lot of things going on in the legislature. We're very dedicated to getting more work done. We know that there are lots of areas, electrification, for example, that we need to work on. I am thinking about working on a model tree canopy ordinance, because I know that's something that a lot of cities and counties want to do, but we want to make sure it's not used to prevent other things that we need to get done, because in my mind, climate and housing and environmental justice are all inextricably linked. And so in order to do that correctly, we need to make sure that we're talking about the things that could prevent housing, affordable housing. And so I'm working on the tree model ordinance, because I think I have an idea that perhaps we could maybe even set up tree banks where a developer could come in. We know that, we try to save existing trees. Oftentimes the new owners just come in and chop them down, or because the trees are left that have been, with brothers and sisters, and suddenly there's a single tree, they don't last, they don't live. And so the idea is there a way perhaps to have developers put money into a tree bank? Maybe we know there's a certain area along Sammamish Slough that needs more shade because the salmon, the heat is hurting the salmon. So those are just preliminary ideas. I'll continue working on 1099 next year. I really appreciated Sarah Ray's presentation, because I wake up with climate anxiety every day. I really do. I have 2 teenagers that are frankly thinking about not having children. And that breaks my heart for them, because children mean hope. So I apologize for being late. I apologize that I need to rush off, but I so appreciate all the work that you all do, and your interest and your support. And please feel free to reach out to me anytime, and keep up the good work. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Duerr, for stopping by, and I know you have to run. So yes, please, if you have questions for Representative Duerr, please send it through your, I'm sure you have a web page or something like that. Yeah, thank you. Well, with that, I'd like to move forward to our next speaker, a person that I actually have a very close friendship with. Her name is Dr. Heather Price. She is a parent, a climate scientist, a climate justice activist, a chemistry professor and researcher at Seattle, Washington. She has her PhD in chemistry and conducted her postdoctoral atmospheric chemistry research with the University of Washington program on climate change. And her current National Science Foundation research project, Climate Justice in Undergraduate STEM Incorporating Civic Engagement, focuses on improving undergraduate STEM education through the integration of climate justice, equity, and civic engagement across the humanities, arts, and STEM curriculum. And she plays a pretty mean banjo. And for Heather, I bid you Sen Nigmela and welcome.
Thank you so much, Brian. And it's been wonderful to hear everyone's, Sarah and Representative Duerr's contributions today. And I hope that what I have to share is going to contribute to that as well. And I'm also, I want to share that I'm actually coming in today from the unceded ancestral lands of the Duwamish people who are still here. And I want to acknowledge that I'm grateful to live and work in these spaces. And today I'm going to share a little bit on where we are in this era of fossil fueled climate change. Like Sarah said, talking about the science, even for me, brings on climate anxiety. So what I really want to do today is explore ideas for how to address this as individuals working collectively within our communities. And one of the ways that I do this is I am active on social media, and I also attend climate strikes and protest wearing my climate dress. And so that's me on the right with my friend Helene. I'm wearing climate data, global climate data for temperatures, annual averages. Each stripe is a year. And my friend Helene is wearing the data for France. So she's French. And on the left is a tweet that I did on Twitter back in 2019. On the day that the carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere reached a peak of 415. And to put this into perspective, we reached 420 when I looked it up this morning. So it's gone up by 5 parts per million since I put this tweet out. And so these are ways that I engage with my community and share what I know. And I'm hoping that through today, we'll also explore some of those ideas. This is temperature data going up through 2020. 2021 is also one of the hottest years on record, and that blue circle is the only coldest year of my colder than average year of my life. When I was a toddler back in the 70s, is 1976, in that blue circle. That is the only colder than average year of my life. And that's based on the average of the 20th century. That means that for young people that are in the room, or anybody that's under 45 years old, you've never lived on Earth during a colder than average year. And so, like Sarah said, this can be emotionally, hard to hear these facts about the era that we were born into. Even those of us that are in our 40s and 50s and 60s. And we know that 1 in 3 Americans has experienced a climate disaster in 2021. Anyone living in the Pacific Northwest or on the West Coast was exposed to the smoke in August. If you lived on the East Coast, you were impacted by hurricanes and flooding from Ida all the way from the Gulf Coast up into New Jersey, where there was flooding. And if you were in Texas, there was extreme cold in February. And then we had a heat wave that was the deadliest weather event in the Pacific Northwest, killing hundreds last summer. And so we're already living with the impacts of climate. We've got the wildfires. Sarah, you're living through this, right? Half of the largest wildfires have happened in 2020 and 2021. And even my colleague who Brian mentioned, I work with students and with faculty at University of Washington. I worked with faculty helping them to incorporate climate justice and civic engagement into their courses. And this is my co-instructor. We co-facilitated it, Alex Turner. And this is an image of his neighborhood where he grew up. And that's where his parents' home used to be. But it burned down just about a month before we started teaching together. And so he shared this in our class to our faculty, just to show that these fires are not only impacting wildlands or, you know, what people think of as forested lands. This is a neighborhood in suburban Colorado. And in Seattle, we've seen the heat wave, and the number of days that Seattle has seen 90-degree Fahrenheit temperatures or higher has doubled since 1945. Used to be about 3 days on average every year, and now the average is 6. And if you look at a couple of years over the past 5 years, the average for some years, for the past 5 years, it's more like 9 days over 90. So it's getting warmer, it's accelerating. And these impacts disproportionately are harming communities that are poorer, historically marginalized communities, Black, Indigenous, Brown communities. And we're also seeing that there is a correlation, not just with the urban heat island effects, but also worse air quality. So a recent article that came out shows the historical redlining is associated with present day air pollution, even though redlining occurred in the 30s and 40s, right? Or it began then. And then I'm sure everyone has seen the Keeling curve, and this is toning in on the lockdowns during COVID and how the carbon dioxide emissions reduced by about 6%. And everybody's like, yay, emissions are down and air quality is looking better, which it was, right? Air quality improves within days of people stopping driving gas-powered and diesel-powered cars, things like that. But look at the peak. It still went up, right? It's like a smoker, rather than smoking 100 cigarettes, they smoke 94. When we know we got to quit. The science is clear. We have to completely quit burning coal, oil, and so-called natural gas. And you can see we're way up at 420 today. This goes back through the ice ages. I'm sure you've all seen these images. And I like to put it in perspective with Mount St. Helens. I grew up here. Most of us are in Washington, or even if you weren't, you've heard of Mount St. Helens probably. And all the carbon emissions from burning coal, oil, methane, so-called natural gas in our homes, our buildings, factories, cars, ships, airplanes, deforestation, all those emissions are equivalent to the greenhouse gases that came from 4,000 Mount St. Helens eruptions going off every year, not just once back in the 80s. And these eruptions, if we average that out, they're equivalent to 10 eruptions a day, every day, all year long. And yet, we're just now starting to see it in the news more and more about the impacts of these emissions. If you're 30 years old, or if you're old enough to remember Nirvana's song Smells Like Teen Spirit, came out in 1990. It's also the year I graduated high school. Consider this: more than half of all the fossil fuel emissions have been pumped into the atmosphere since 1990. The other half of all fossil fuel emissions were from the dawn of industrialization until 1990. And so we're seeing this acceleration, and we know, as has been brought up in both of the previous talks, that there is an impact on people's health, that air pollution from burning fossil fuels is responsible for over 950 deaths in the USA per day, and is responsible for 1 in 5 premature deaths worldwide. And this is research coming out of Harvard's Chan School of Public Health. And we know that also children living in homes with gas stoves face a comparable risk of asthma to a child who's living in a household with cigarette smoke, that having gas in the home is now recognized as one of the leading triggers for asthma in children. It increases a child's risk of asthma by 42%. So more and more pediatricians are starting to ask the parents or the caregivers of children who are presenting with asthma, hey, do you have gas in the home? And suggesting, hey, if you rent, talk with your landlord about next time when they remodel, put in an induction. If you're going to remodel, put in an induction, get gas out of the house. To protect the air quality, because it leads to high levels of particulate matter, that PM 2.5, also NOx and formaldehyde. So all of those things, and it's not good stuff to be breathing. This just illustrates that the IPCC has been, and the scientists, my colleagues, have been telling us for decades. And this is from the 2018 report on 1.5 degrees Celsius, saying, we really, really, really need to get as close to stopping at 1.5 degrees Celsius as we can. Even right now at 1.1 degrees, we're already seeing harm and death from the heating at 1.1. And right now, according to the IPCC report that came out a couple of weeks ago, we're headed for 3. Which is really catastrophic. So we have got our work cut out for us. And that's what I want to really focus on more today, because look over here, coal, oil, and gas. In order to stop at 1.5, that means stranded assets. That means economics that we need to invest in so that we don't burn that coal, oil, and gas, that we leave it in the ground. And that's where I want to get into some ideas around climate justice. And as a scientist, this quote from Sarah Myrie, this is Dr. Sarah Myrie, she's a climate scientist, was a Drawdown Senior Fellow and Director of the Rowan Institute. She was also trained as at University of Washington. She says, quote, "I should not be expected to be objective about the kind of world I'm leaving my child. What a shitty ancestor. What a bad job you're doing if you're going to sit on the sidelines and document the world burning around you." Which to me as a scientist tells me I have information and I feel compelled to, that I have a duty to share what I know. And more scientists are recognizing that. And the youth are demanding it. This is Shia Bastida. She's a 19-year-old climate activist, and she's also a student at Penn State. And she says, "We demand comprehensive, non-Eurocentric and intersectional climate education, including literacy on climate justice, environmental racism, ancestral and indigenous wisdom, historical movements, disability justice, green careers, and sustainable living." And she said this at Biden's climate summit last year. This is Mary Anais Heglar, and she's a writer. She says, "It's not just time to talk about climate, it's time to talk about it as a Black issue. It is. It's time to stop whitewashing it. In other words, it's time to stop all lives mattering, the climate crisis." This is one of our local climate activists. His name is Aji Piper. He's 20 years old, and he is one of the 21 young people suing the US government. And he said, our federal government has not been held accountable for the gross failure to protect life and the future life on this earth, forcing us children to take drastic actions to procure the needed motivation in order to save life on this planet. And then finally, Vanessa Nakate, who is a youth climate activist in Uganda, and she says, "We cannot achieve climate justice without racial justice." And this brings me to this idea that I bring up in my classes and in my work with faculty around inter versus intergenerational climate justice, where intergenerational climate justice is like, you can see grandma there with her great grandkids. These are my kids on the right and their cousins. And the impact of one generation and their resource use on future generations who might not even be born yet, who have no say or little say in what the choices are of that older generation. Or there's intra-generational climate justice, which is illustrated by the wedges on the right. And so I adapted this from another graphic, a health disparities graphic. And the climate impacts are the boulder, and the person is representing a community or people. And all of these wedges represent things that as the wedges get wider, it makes it harder and harder for that person or community to contend with those climate impacts, whether they are smoke or PM 2.5 or flooding. And these are things like lack of education, inadequate food and nutrition, employment, And I think they're illustrated really nicely by the smoke that we get in the summer. The climate exacerbated PM 2.5 from the smoke. And these are climate exacerbated fires. They are not natural fires anymore. And if you have inadequate housing, you're not going to be able to get out of the smoke. If you are in poverty, you're not going to be able to afford the asthma medication or the HEPA filters that you might need, right? I have a child in my home who is asthmatic, and we spent upwards of $400 just on their asthma medications over the last year. Many of my students, many of our neighbors cannot afford that. And so those wedges, this is our challenge, is how do we shrink these wedges as a community? And one of the ways to do that, Station Coffee House, this is a Instagram post that Got Green Seattle, a BIPOC organization in Seattle, posted, where people could go and pick up free air filters. Or if you had filters that you wanted to donate or air conditioners that you wanted to donate, you could drop them off at the Station Coffee House. And so this is an example of a way of reducing those wedges and giving people in the community through mutual aid ways of contending with the impacts. And, as a scientist, I have been teaching about climate, and I've realized that it has been a mistake to leave the teaching of climate to the scientists, that it really is going to take humanities and art and music and drama and community to solve this. That, imagine if doctors only gave patients test results, right? That's not enough. We need to teach ourselves and our students about the climate crisis and its impacts, but we also need to teach them how to heal and repair and address the problems, right? Doctors don't just give you the test results and walk away. They give you the information to help heal and repair. And so I think that's a lot of what I want to focus on, because people are concerned about climate change. The number of people who are either concerned or alarmed is now over 50%. But the problem is, of those alarmed, only a quarter of them are actually in support or are actually doing actions, whether it is supporting direct action or protest or policies. And so that's where our challenge is how do we activate the people who are most alarmed and concerned? And right now, the people who are taking action, who are taking part in policy, who are calling their representatives, it's mostly young people, and it's more likely to be people who are Black, Indigenous, Black and Brown folks. They have a higher percentage of folks who, according to the Yale Climate Communication, and I'll drop some of these links as well to share these. But we know what we need to do. This has come up in previous talks, right? We know we have all the solutions. We know that talking about it helps get the word out. We know that putting solar panels, not just on homes, right? That's an individual action, but as a solar field, so whole communities benefit. Eating climate-friendly foods. Beef, if you took beef, it would be, if it were a country, it would be the 4th largest emitter of greenhouse gases. So even just shifting diets, shifting transportation to electric, and supporting incentives for people to drive or ride, right? For e-bikes, there's more and more incentives coming out about e-bikes. Replacing gas with things like heat pumps and induction. Basically electrify everything, stop burning things. And this also brings up for me, I'm a chemist. And so there was some talk earlier about methane and renewable natural gas. And I warn you, please do not be fooled by this latest push for the use of biogas or renewable natural gas. My background is as an atmospheric chemist, and RNG, which is renewable natural gas, and also gray or blue hydrogen, that's essentially a derivative of fossil fuels, is not a solution to the climate crisis. Yes, RNG should be captured at those landfill sites and used at those landfill sites. What the representative brought up, that's great. Where the problem is the fossil fuel industry is touting RNG as a way to continue the use of fossil fuel methane, so-called natural gas, being pumped into our homes, where it's then poisoning us through the air quality in our homes. And then there's also a number of studies that are coming out. I'm going to drop in the chat a couple of these around the issues with RNG. Renewable natural gas is not cost effective in any way other than to have it be used in the location where it's being produced. Because yes, methane is a very strong greenhouse gas. It does need to be captured and either flared or captured and used on site. That's really the best way. But we need to stop pumping things into our homes and our buildings. You know, methane is methane, no matter its source. And anytime that you burn it indoors, it's going to create air pollution similar to living with a smoker. Green hydrogen, created from electrolysis of water and fueled using zero carbon sources, is so far the only climate friendly and truly zero carbon form of hydrogen. My postdoctoral research was with the program on climate change, and I focused on hydrogen. I added hydrogen and deuterium to a global chemical transport model that's being used at Harvard, and looked at what would happen if we went to a hydrogen economy. Green hydrogen is the only solution today. I dropped another link in there about blue hydrogen and the problems with that, based on studies coming out of both Stanford and Cornell. And then I do want to get into the good news, because we're on the right path. Washington had the first electric school bus was unveiled in Tacoma at Franklin High School. Washington State, we've signed the nation's earliest gas car ban into law. I think we've got some people from Cultura that are going to be in breakout sessions later today. I encourage you to ask them questions. Solar energy has a potential to power 40% of the US electricity by 2035. And you look at New York, and Ithaca is going to become the first city to try and electrify all of its buildings, and coming up with ways to help communities to do that, right? So that it's not just the rich who are, right? The rich who have the means to be able to be that ripple. Absolutely, your individual choices are going to ripple out, but we need to come up with ways that everybody can decarbonize. And this means engaging with community. It means supporting and taking part in protests. It means talking climate. It means contacting our elected officials, getting involved in social media, even things like wearing a button. And I'll show some examples of these. This is the civic and community engagement ideas that faculty that I work with have come up with to incorporate into their classes. And that people that I collaborate with also do in their daily lives, things that you can do. So things, number one, share what you know. You already know more about climate change probably than 90%, 99% of the people out there, because you're here and you're interested in it. And so this graphic right here, this is from an organization that I co-founded. You heard about Leslie Davenport. She's also part of this organization, and she's written not just the book that Sarah recommended, but this one is for children, middle schoolers, called All the Feelings Under the Sun, How to Deal with Climate Change. Another youth that I highly recommend reading, this is Jamie Margolin, and she wrote a book called Youth to Power. And at 14, 15 years old, she founded a climate justice youth organization called 0 Hour. And when you talk about climate, this organization really helps to frame it in an age-appropriate way. That, you know, you're not going to talk with, I think about talking about climate like sharing about grandma being sick. And when you share with a 4-year-old, you're going to share very different information than you are with a 14-year-old or 24-year-old. And it's the same thing with climate. For small children, it's all about building that love of nature, that building that love of community, take them down to the stream to see those new critters that are there. And then as they get older, they probably are going to want to get involved, but in a way that connects with their friends, and, you know, making it fun. So there's lots of examples in there, including stuff from Raffi. He's a couple of his songs are in there, and other ways of doing this: outreach, social media, art and fashion. So this is drawings by Maddie Welch. for different scientists. Lilo Pozzo is a scientist, a climate scientist at University of Washington that works on battery technology. And then Dargan Frierson, he's a climate scientist and atmospheric chemist and atmospheric scientist at University of Washington, and he posted about Don't Look Up, the movie. And then there's another faculty there whose students will post and will put the hashtag for the class so that they can share what they're learning in their environmental studies courses with the world, right? These are public posts on Twitter for these ones, but they also post on TikTok and Facebook and things like that, helping our students attend lobby days or ourselves attending, and encouraging and helping others to vote, being a leader, run for political office, like our Brian and my colleague Tracy did. So, and then examples of meeting with and connecting with elected officials. Right now, I am in the middle of a challenge. I'm challenging myself to contact my elected officials for 30 days. I was prompted by a colleague, Eliza Nemzer, who founded Climate Change Makers. And so I encourage you check them out. They meet once a week for just an hour to come up with ideas for how to push your legislators, whoever your elected officials are, to do climate action. And then here's the phone number for US Congress. On the right, you can see indigenous land protectors and water protectors from the Protectors of the Salish Sea meeting with Governor Inslee. In the bottom right is me and a student and a physician from University of Washington, a professor, meeting with our legislators on Zoom. So, it's much more accessible today. More examples, of organizations locally. And then again, that mutual aid example. And then a big one that I want to make sure is, this is Marcus Bose. He is the professor at UW Medical School, and he's also at Children's Hospital. And this is an example of a system change that he is pushing for within his work. So each of us has a sphere of influence, whether it's within our homes, our communities, our churches, synagogues, temples, schools, wherever we are, that we can shift the systems around us. And Marcus is in with the residency programs. He has called for them to conduct those interviews virtually. And he has continued that. So now there's that system change. And he did this based on this paper, right? The carbon footprint of residency interviews. And although I'm not a fan of carbon footprints, because carbon footprint is an idea from the fossil fuel industry, I think that we need to be focusing our attention on shifting the systems. And as individuals, yes, I don't fly anymore. I take road trips. So I do individual things, but I don't expect that my individual choices are going to make much difference for the carbon in the atmosphere. But what it's going to do is it's going to ripple out. We are social animals. And so when I talk about my road trips, or when my colleague Mead talks about her road trip this summer, and shares that on social media, that has a ripple effect on our communities to normalize not flying, to normalize electrifying our homes, right? Sharing that news. And so by Marcus doing this work and sharing it out to his community, it's that ripple effect. And also protest. Research shows that when people take part in protest, it helps to build community, and protest really is one of the main ways that civic change, policy change occurs. I heard Alex Rammel talk about how he has been impacted by seeing the young people out there protesting. There's on the left, you see young people, that's Audrey Piper, and there's my son and a couple of their friends, and then there's UW students from October. And then on the right, this is yesterday, a bunch of us, I'm right there in the middle wearing my Electrify Everything sweatshirt, meeting President Biden and pressuring him to continue to put an end to fossil fuels. So getting out there and building community It really does work. And civil disobedience. One of my colleagues at NASA, a climate scientist, was arrested last week for chaining himself to a Chase bank. And, he's not the first. Thousands of water protectors in Canada and in the US have been arrested, and yet that does not show up on the news. And yet this NASA scientist is now gone viral with his, right? And so civil disobedience works. And then I want to leave us with a question. So what are you looking forward to as the world addresses fossil fuel climate change? And what will your home, your work, your travel look like and even smell like as the world is decarbonized with justice and equity in mind? One of the things, my answer to this is I think about when I'm driving down the freeway or when I'm walking, how much better the world is going to smell as transportation is electrified and we no longer have diesel and gas cars polluting the air that we're smelling, that our children are going to breathe easier as their buses are no longer diesel and that they're electric, things like that. And with that, thank you so much. If you have any questions for me, here's my email. And I don't know if we have any time for further questions or if you need to move on, but please email me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. And what a fantastic way to think about how to get psyched up to get involved. We are a little bit strained on time, but there was a question in the chat that I thought I could throw at you real quick.
Sure, go for it.
It was, let's see, from Bill McCauley. He asked, if as we electrify everything, how do we deal with the increasing power outages and the impacts of sustained outages? How might you answer that one, Bill?
Yeah, it's interesting. The climate crisis itself is having an impact on these outages. If you go back, I'll have to find the article, but if you go back even 10, 20 years ago, we did not have the same number of power outages as we do today. Our infrastructure is getting old, right? The California's electric lines, the transmission lines are getting old. And yeah, there's going to need to be funding going toward that, right? You look at how much the US is, right? Where is the money going? And right now it's all going into the military. It's all, right? If you look at the military budget versus what's going into even education, it's a huge difference there. And yeah, we're going to have to update it. We're going to have to make investments. And that's what they are. They are investments in our health. They are multi-solving, right? When you put in a heat pump in your home, you're not just making a climate choice, you're also making a health choice for yourself and for your neighborhood. And then one other thing I want to mention is our emotional impacts that we have on our children. So I have two children. One is a climate activist and one is not. And the one who is not a climate activist, she came home and she told me, hey, Mom, my friend and I were having a conversation about how we were losing sleep. I was losing sleep over my exams. And my friend said, no, I'm losing sleep over climate change. And her friend asked her, well, aren't you losing sleep over climate change? And my daughter said, I worry about it, but I'm not losing sleep over it because my mom's working on that. And somehow having adults, right? Sarah brought this up, that youth feel betrayed by adults and by the powers that be, the people who have power. And so those of us that are in the room, by us talking about it, teaching about it, doing things within our workplaces, our homes, right? Those individual actions that we take, they're a drop in the bucket, but what they do is they ripple out for the system change that's going to be needed.
Well, I think unfortunately, we will have to move on, Heather, and thank you so much again. And if you do have questions for Heather, did you put your email in the chat there?
I'll drop it in the chat too. Thank you so much.
You bet. So now we have our next session, which is actually going to be the youth panel, which is always a favored part of our town hall meeting. And to moderate that is Tracy Furutani, and Tracy is a tenured science faculty member at North Seattle College, where he currently teaches about natural disasters and their social and economic impacts. He obtained his PhD in geological science at the University of Washington He currently is a Lake Forest Park City Council member and sits on the board of the Shore Lake Arts, thinking about the next film he's going to make. Maybe the inside scoop would be some kind of pantomime with racial carts in Silent Spring or something. I'm not sure. But anyways, I'd like to welcome Tracy and Sen Nigmela to you, Tracy, and thank you for taking over.
Sen Nigmela to you too, Brian. I appreciate the kind introduction. Thank you everybody for attending this, and appreciate basically the opportunity to moderate this panel. It's a great honor. As Brian mentioned, I'm a sitting Lake Forest Park City Council member, and one of the things that I'm noting is that we have a quorum of our City Council here. Don't worry, we're not violating the Open Public Meetings Act, but the fact is that, you know, as our speakers have been saying, more and more elected officials are becoming empowered by all of you to basically start working on this issue. And, you know, starting is really a terrible word, right? We should have been working on it all along. One of the things that we're doing in our city here is, since we were supposedly the respite from civilization when we were platted back in the 19-teens, and I also want to acknowledge the Duwamish peoples on whose land we're working on right now, and the ability to basically continue having conversations like this. The fact is that basically to preserve our ability to have such a respite from civilization, we need to really worry about basically these kinds of things. And we have a climate action committee that's been formed recently in the city. And for the first time, one of the city committees is actually going to have representation by students. And we've reserved one seat. And kind of the worry there was, you know, would we get enough people to apply? And not only did we get enough people to apply, we have 2 student members, a couple of whom you're going to hear today. And so we're really becoming cognizant of the fact that, yes, the people who we're going to be most affected by the future should really be sitting on these policy-making boards and basically saying things about what they want to see their future to look like, as Heather and Sarah Ray have been pointing out. All right, so in any case, I'd like to basically start by introducing one of our speakers who's not able to be here. Her name is Bella Tancredi. She's basically at Shorecrest High School. She's a junior, and she's the president and creator of the Shorecrest Climate Justice Club. And I think I'm going to let her words speak for her. So hang on, let me share the screen. Okay. Hopefully everybody can see this. Okay.
Hi, my name is Bella Tancredi. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a junior at Shorecrest High School. I was supposed to speak on this youth panel, and then my plane flight got changed to directly during the town hall, so I'm recording this little video instead. A little bit about me. Like I said, I'm a junior. I've been involved in leadership since my freshman year at Shorecrest, and I'm next year's ASB president-elect. And I'm very passionate about the climate crisis. 2 years ago, I started Shorecrest's Climate Justice Club, and our goal is to take action to mitigate the climate crisis locally and equitably. We have between 20 and 30 active members within school, and we organize activities in our school community for the students and outside more politically. Our main focus is working in the Shoreline and Lake Forest Park area and kind of the surrounding communities. For example, this year we were supporting the electrification bill for Shoreline for all new construction, and we wrote.
Oh no. My apologies.
To our legislators in Shoreline, and then we went and gave testimony at the city council vote, and the ordinance was passed unanimously, which is a really big success for the whole city. And yeah, so along with being involved in the local political arena,
my apologies. This is completely my mess up.
we organize a lot within our school. This past week, yesterday was Earth Day. Right now, for me, it's today, but when you're watching it, it'll be yesterday. We, instead of just celebrating Earth Day, we decided to organize an Earth Week, where each day we had a different activity. So we did chalk, writing, and messages around our whole school with like Earth Day related messages and drawings and such. And we hosted.
Yeah. My apologies. Let me try one different thing.
It's actually working okay there.
Okay. Yeah, the problem is basically that, yeah, my buffering system is basically not keeping up with how fast the video is going. Let me see if I can optimize that. All right, hopefully, let's see if this works.
Tracy, someone suggested in the chat that you might turn off your camera while it's going. That might help.
That's a really good point. Thank you.
A vegetarian potluck one day, and we distributed these, we made these native seed bombs and distributed them around shoreline traffic circles. And the most exciting thing, I think, was Cameron Reed from the city of Shoreline came to our school, and me and my advisor hosted a climate forum in our theater where he discussed our climate action plan for the city of Shoreline and then talked about updating it. And we had an overwhelming amount of students volunteer to be a part of a focus group that would update it. And that was like a really big deal and a very big success. So that's just a snippet of what my club does. And if you want to talk more about it, if you have any questions or you know of any opportunities that you think we would like to get involved in or you think we should check out, you can email me at isabellatancredi@gmail.com, and maybe someone can put that in the chat, or I can just spell it out too. It's ISABELLATANCRETI@gmail.com. Yeah, and to answer what I think is one of Tracy's other questions, in my opinion and experience, the most meaningful way to get involved is to find organizations and groups that fight for issues that you care about, to work with locally, and just really start from there and build your experience and knowledge from there. Oftentimes, I think people feel like they have to have a certain amount of knowledge or experience on a subject that they care about in order to make an impact. But the only thing that you actually need is to care enough to make the leap to get involved. And when I first got involved with climate organizations, I didn't know much of the nitty-gritty behind climate change or how to deal with it politically. But I gained so much knowledge from just showing up and listening to people that I looked up to. And I'm really grateful for all the different opportunities I just grabbed at and learned from. And that is.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I'm sorry that Bella wasn't able to be here. She's actually one of the members of the Climate Action Committee that I mentioned. I'd like to turn to the live panelists that we have. I'm just going to call you in order, alphabetical order by last name. I have no other way of doing this. So I'd like to introduce Anna Cote. She is the participates in environmental volunteer work at the Youth Ocean Advocate at Seattle Aquarium during the summer. She does park cleanups, data collection for beach restorations during the summer, and is looking to study environmental science in college. So Anna, I'd like to ask you, what are you and your organization at your school working to raise awareness and help combat the effects of climate change?
Thank you, Tracy. So I'm a junior at Bishop Blanchette High School. It's near Green Lake. And I'm involved in Global Health Club there, which is led by a senior who originally started the club a couple of years ago. And basically, I'm working to create more crossover between the topics of global health and climate change, because there are so many. One of them being the more violent weather acts due to climate change all over, such as increased precipitation, leading to contaminated water, which is worse for third world countries and places that don't have as much access to clean water as places like the US. And the water that's used for drinking in these countries because of overflow, but more locally, the weather events like Heather Price said, like the increase in forest fires have been leading to increased respiratory issues for young people and older people. or even just the smog that's been created by increased carbon emissions, which has led to injuries and deaths. And so this is an immediate health concern, which is what global health is all about. And so this kind of just shows the direct connection that global health and climate change kind of have, and they do go hand in hand. So mainly going to a Catholic private high school, it's difficult to have clubs implemented that are kind of involved in what can be seen as somewhat controversial activism. And so just trying to get more students to become aware of the changing world around them, as opposed to, for example, yesterday, I saw so many of my peers posting for Earth Day on Instagram, even though I know so many of them are not directly involved in events or actions to help better our planet. And we need to just focus on making climate change, like it exists and it is happening. And so trying to kind of just make other students aware in my school and in other schools that where the students may not be given direct access to that information. They might have to dig a little bit, but I'm trying to make that more accessible within the club and within becoming one of the leaders next year. When the current leader graduates, I'm going to start implementing that more effectively.
Thank you very much, Anna. And I forgot to mention, Anna, you're actually one of the members of the Climate Action Committee in Lake Forest Park now. And so welcome. And, we're looking to do some really good work coming up with a climate action plan. Okay, so I also wanted to mention to everybody that if you want to post questions for any of our panelists, please put them in the chat and we'll be taking a look as we go along. All right, so the next person up is Elise Puchalski. She's a junior at Orca High School. She's a research scuba diver and PADI dive ambassador, completing her junior year. And she's contributed to the Edmonds Underwater Park website, routinely participates in underwater cleanups at the Port of Edmonds. She deeply cares about the environment, especially in relation to the ocean, and strives to be a voice advocating for its health and importance to humans. So Elise, do you want to talk a little bit about what you and your organization at your school are doing to raise awareness and help combat the effects of climate change?
Thank you, Tracy. So the school I'm going to is a Running Start program called Ocean Research College Academy, focused on learning more about the ocean. So I have the privilege that almost everyone at my school cares about the climate. And one of the main things we're doing in multiple classes is learning about the environment. And we have data from the past 10 or 15 years out in the Possession Sound that we collect and do research and analyze the data. And then we share our data and present it at other conferences. And then our director is in contact with lots of other people studying the Salish Sea. So at school, I get to contribute weekly on trying to help learn more about what's going on in our ocean and how humans impact it. Right now, I'm doing a research project on heavy metals in sediments and eelgrass. And heavy metals in too large amounts can hurt animals and plants in the ocean. So if there's too much in the sediments or the phytoplankton, it will work its way up the food chain and affect the larger mammals. So learning about these sediments and eelgrass, like at the bottom level, will help everyone understand the bigger health of the ocean and what's going on in the sound.
Thanks very much, Elise, and we really wish you well with your work. It's that research just sounds fascinating. We're hoping you come back and tell us about what the results of that are. All right, moving on then, we're going to talk to Noah Singleton, who's a sophomore at Shorecrest High School. And Noah's a member of the Shorecrest Climate Justice Club, works on the environment and focuses on paper consumption at schools and the amount of waste produced, specifically carbon. I know, Noah, that we've heard from your colleague, Bella, about what the Climate Justice Club is doing. I wanted to get your unique take on how you're working to raise awareness and help combat the effects of climate change.
Yeah, so like you said, I'm a member of Climate Justice Club at Shorecrest High School, same with Bella Tancredi, which we heard from before. We've been speaking at open forums or town council meetings to pass bills and stuff like that. I can't I don't remember what they're called, sorry. But I have been focusing on paper consumption at our school because I noticed that I've been getting a ton of just like random pieces of paper to put in my notebook, and that felt like a waste, and we could be doing so much more to stop that. And so I figured out that we as a school, as my school, use about 3,240,000 pieces of paper a year just in one school year, which is a lot of paper. And it's also 324 tons of carbon, which is crazy to me. And there's easy ways that we can prevent it. Like there's a website called Cami that's completely free, which allows us to openly edit documents and PDFs that our teachers could give us. So instead of doing my math homework on a piece of paper that I'll just throw away the next day or recycle, I can open my computer and write on top of the PDF to turn in to my teacher the next day without having a notebook full of paper that I'll get rid of at the end of the year. Also, there's every day in my math and English class, we have like a warm up that we do where we just like write on a piece of paper and then give it to our teacher, and then she'll grade it and recycle it. And we could easily do this on like a Google Doc or even like a whiteboard, which all of the teachers have, they just don't use them. And that would greatly reduce the amount of paper that we use and the amount of carbon that we emit as a school just from paper. Yeah. And I'm currently working on like meeting with the staff leaders at our school to help implement these ideas to reduce our paper consumption.
That's wonderful, Noah. It's a super important question. And, of course, yeah, schools are notorious for being huge paper generators. So good luck to your work on that. All right, so I'm looking in the chat here, and this is sort of the unscripted portion of the chat. I'm going to ask all of you, what can adults do to support the work that you do? After all, a lot of the interactions, you're not necessarily the decision maker. So what can basically people who are in positions of making decisions help you in your work? And I'll just open it up to anybody. Feel free to just chime in.
First, I'm going to safely assume that many of you guys are parents. And so making sure that you're being blunt with your kids about the subjects and empowering them to use their voice and, tackle a part of the issue that they're passionate in, because there are so many different aspects of it that need to be addressed. And then as well as just promoting positive thinking around it and knowing that there are little things that you can do in your own life to be conscious of your own, impact to the earth, like composting or reserving water, or even just using like reusable grocery bags.
Yeah, adding on to what Anna was saying, assuming you're all parents, high school students aren't notoriously organized. I think that's safe to say, but parents are easier to make a group and talk to someone about it. And so if a group of parents got together and started talking to the school leaders, principals, school board staff, they would start listening, because it's hard to listen to one student who's thinking about paper, thinking about metal in the ocean, because if all of the parents at the school started saying, hey, we need to teach our kids about this, they're more likely to listen than 2 or 3 kids in high school. Yeah.
Adding on to what Anna and Noah said, so I really like what Heather was saying earlier about getting kids outside in nature and making them love it, because I grew up being out, going on hikes, playing on the beach, and that's one of the reasons I care so much about the climate. And something else, so Tracy mentioned that I participate in underwater cleanups, and we need surface volunteers for that. And we've often had kids there with their parents, and Girl Scout troops come, and that's raising awareness for them, seeing how much trash really is in the ocean, and it really opens their eyes that there's more than what they can just see on the surface. So supporting kids going to different events and just seeing the problems.
All right, thanks all of you. Yeah, these are all Great insights. And I love the fact that you all came up with different things that were interconnected, but were quite separate things that people could talk about. And yeah, the role of parents can't be understated in all of this. So I'm gonna, cognizant of the time, we only have about 5 minutes left. Let's go to a lightning round kind of thing. And I want you to take about 30 seconds or so to tell me what's the one thing that our audience can do that will help make their family, school, community more climate change resilient. And I'm going to start in reverse order. So Noah, go.
Yeah, like I was saying earlier, if all of the parents just like started talking to the school board members, it would make a huge difference because, like I said, the high school students and clubs aren't super organized in getting meetings and stuff to the and I guess I can only speak on Shorecrest's behalf, but yeah, talking to the school board people would be really helpful.
Wonderful. And I know that we have at least one school board member here, Sarah Betnell. I'd like to acknowledge her presence and definitely reach out to her through the chat if you'd like. Elise, what have you got?
I would say, first of all, talk to your friends and family, get out in nature and enjoy it, and give them a reason to care about the climate. Because if they don't care about it, if they don't have a passion, nothing is going to happen. They're not going to do something for the climate if they don't care about it at all. And then, as Heather was saying, like make little decisions about like what food you buy, sustainable sources, and like if you're gardening, make sure to like use not harmful pesticides. If you're using anything to deter rabbits or something, don't use harmful chemicals because that all ends up in the ocean and then will end up in food like seafood. So, yeah.
Great, thank you. Love your emphasis on the ocean. And then finally, and Anna, what have you got?
I think just again making sure that we're fostering those connections within neighborhoods and communities, and making sure that we're actively starting conversations with people around us. Again, like Elise said, yeah, giving them a reason to care about the environment and to realize each person's individual impacts, and kind of disparaging that ideology of, not like what one person does will not affect the world, because it does. Every single person's actions affect it. And yeah, just going about your daily life and kind of acknowledging that impact, and making conscious choices to help your community and people around you grow.
Wow, and if all you aren't inspired by these messages our students just gave us, I don't know what will, right? I mean, basically, this is the flip side of climate anxiety / climate paralysis, is the fact that, every action matters. And I think these students really did a great job of bringing that home. Thank you very much, panelists, for basically being such an awesome source of inspiration. I want to also point out to our panelists that there's an invitation already for the Climate Justice Club to actually meet with some community groups. Noah, there's this question specifically for you about the software you're using. So please take a look, panelists, at our chat, and make sure that you can see all the support you're getting, as well as some questions. And unfortunately, we have to turn it back to Brian because we're running out of time here. But again, thank you very much for your participation as well as your activism. It's a great inspiration.
Yes, thank you very much, youth panel. It's always it always at least leaves me with some amazing feelings about optimism, and that's the reason why we really like having you guys on the show. And thank you, Tracy, for a wonderful job with those questions and moderating. Well, we've come to the part of our program where we actually are going to take a break. For those of us who would like to go get something to eat or use the restrooms. Although while we are on break, there actually will be a climate conversation going on that I believe Sarah Phillips and Sally Yamasaki are going to be talking to us. They're going to welcome you to a climate conversation at this break time. And so please feel free to get your lunch and just take a break. And then Sally and Sarah are going to have a conversation about climate, and they hope you'll join in.
Yeah. Thank you, Brian. Sarah, did you want to jump in and start?
I do. we want you to join in this climate conversation. What we're going to do is we want to use the chat as part of what we're doing. And I know that's hard because the chat is sort of an awkward function, but we want to try and use it so everybody can be engaged. Dan's going to be monitoring the chat and sharing your questions and comments and concerns. On Zoom, we know it's hard, but we're just going to try. Dan?
Yeah,
Dan?
I'm already here.
Okay, Sally?
You know, I'm always taken back by the students, and they give me so much inspiration. I just want to again give a shout out to the students. It was the youth. They did an amazing job, and their work is amazing. And this whole town hall, one thing that has kind of been a focus that I really appreciate is that we can't this climate change as a fearful thing. I think it was Catherine Hayhoe said that if you're afraid, you run away from things that you're afraid of. If a bear is coming at you, you don't run toward it, you run away. And we can't do that when it comes to climate change. So some of the first things that the simplest things we can do is to simply talk about it. Because as we start to talk about it, that simple act can start a feedback loop leading to a greater awareness and concern, and then we are able to take action. I know that's how I even got started. I had no idea even where, the atmosphere and all these different things. And it was Brian Saunders, you probably don't remember, at a neighborhood party, I asked you a question, I think a very simple question, and we started talking, and that got me more curious. And that's how I got even started in this in our community.
Well, one of the things for me is I've been thinking about plastics. I was listening to the radio the other day, and it said that microplastics were shedding from my clothing and in my washing machine, and that in fact, some of these particles had crossed the placenta boundary. So I'm trying to get rid of plastics sort of one step at a time. So one of the things I decided to do was to use laundry sheets instead of bottle of detergent that comes in a plastic container. So these are concentrated little sheets, and I throw them in my washing machine and they dissolve. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you all is, what small steps have you taken to eliminate plastics? Anybody, anything in the chat there, Dan?
Nothing yet.
Okay, well, one of the things clearly as you look at this, I was interested that Starbucks was saying they weren't going to have one single-use cups in the future. They were going to figure out how not to do that.
We're sorry, we're now getting lots of things coming in here. We got grocery bags, water bottles, glass food jars, and use them for storage, reusable water bottles. They stopped buying Ziploc bags for the last couple of years. Reusable bottle and glass straw. Gee, lots of things here. Mesh bags instead of vegetable bags. Laundry detergent, wax containers like milk cartons. Avoid plastic produce bags by using reusable ones or putting loose ones in carts. Great.
Okay, those are all fabulous ideas.
Yeah. Sorry. I have one. Sarah, can people see me?
Yeah.
You can. So here's another thing that's from my Japanese culture, is that like when you go to take food or things to potlucks, now instead any saran wrap, because like what someone said in the chat, I don't use Ziploc bags or even that saran wrap stuff anymore, because I take like these bread bags and cut them. And if I have an item to put, I'll just cover it with the top and then just get a scarf, which in Japanese they call furoshiki. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
And you just tie it closed, and you have something easy to take to your potluck. So it's another example.
Okay.
Oh, and there's more. Luann uses plastic for making art.
Oh.
So she's reusing those. Yeah, plastic bags. Keeps reusable bags in the car. Compostable sandwich bags. Bring
Okay,
your
we're
own
gonna-
coffee cup to the coffee shop.
There's a lot. That's a lot of great things. So Sarah, then another area is home, that we have a huge impact on our carbon footprint. Unfortunately, our heat at our house is still gas, or as we learn, methane, and how bad that is from our previous speakers. What I would really like to do is switch to a heat pump, which would get us off gas, but I'm not there yet. So my baby step has been to just turn my thermostat down 1 degree. And just last night, I turned it down 1 more, so we're down 2 degrees. And yeah, I mean, it actually feels better at night, and you sleep better with the cooler, and it feels better because we're doing something for the environment. What about, is there, Sarah, something you're doing, or other people in the chat that can share things that they're doing?
So what are you doing to make your homes climate friendly? One of the things I did was I found some batteries that you could, rechargeable batteries that you could charge in your port in your computer, which I really like those. And one of the things you could do is, if you're really interested in this particular piece, there's a workshop on home weatherization after this. So one of the breakout rooms is on home weatherization. But what are you doing to make your home climate friendly?
Well, we have light bulbs changing to LED. Somebody mentioned ceramic wall heaters. Calling your legislator to push for policies and laws to ban single-use plastics. Smart thermostats. Lots of good ideas here.
Yeah, we have a lot of stuff that's going on. One of the things, the other place that sometimes people are thinking about where you can do it is how to make how to become a climate-friendly gardener. My friends in the garden club are telling me that they're having some difficulty with what to plant these days because they've gotten new bugs because the climate has changed, and they're trying to figure out what they should plant. I've actually taken out all my grass I say that as if it was easy. It was a 3-year project, taking out my grass and replacing it with compost and mulch.
Yeah, with climate change, there are a lot of areas where it seems like we need to rethink in many ways what is beautiful, like you eliminating your grass. I'm kind of like trying to not eliminate all my dandelions because I know it helps the bees, and not to mow so often. But the other thing too is mowing lawns. In this journey of learning more about climate, I came across a Swedish study that said using a gas-powered lawnmower for 1 hour has the same carbon footprint as a 100-mile car trip. That's like going from Lake Forest Park all the way out to the peninsula, past, right around Forks by the ocean. And so simple things like what you did, eliminating your grass, means that you don't have to mow your lawn, or switching over to an electric lawnmower like we're doing now.
Yeah, I guess the city was talking about shifting over to battery powered. They're going to look at it and see battery.
Right, and it really works. I'm surprised. They have we found a Makita self-propelled lawnmower, and it really works well. So I'm surprised it's not like the old days.
Yeah. What are other people doing for their garden to make it friendly?
Well, we've got we're using sink water to water the lawn, putting in more native plants that are beneficial to benefit birds and insects. Converting power tools from gas to electric. Let's see. Don't water your lawn. Yeah, native plants, drip irrigation. Yeah, that's another one.
Okay, well, we're going to keep on moving and where you can make these differences, and transportation is one.
Yeah, our next area, transportation, is where we can really lessen our carbon footprint. I've heard that actually the 2 biggest areas where we can work on, or we need to work on, are actually our buildings, like our houses, and transportation. But Sarah, why don't you explain some of these? This is an area that I'm I'm not so good at, but I'm working on. Why don't you share some things you've been doing?
Okay, well, I'm going to tell you about a joke about e-bikes. And that is, how do you know if someone got an e-bike? And the answer is, they tell you. So I'm going to tell you I got an e-bike and I love it. And if you want to learn more about it, we're going to have a breakout session on e-bikes as well as e-vehicles as ways to look at this. But one of the questions, you know, we need to walk more, we need to ride share, we need to carpool. What are your strategies for driving less? And what's the hardest part about driving less? You know, I have a friend actually who's decided not to fly ever again. That was interesting that Heather was saying that too, that she's taking road trips instead. But what are you guys doing on in our transportation areas?
And again, we have a variety. We have electric cars. People are driving electric cars. They stopped flying. Of course, using Zoom and things like that. Taking the bus, biking, light rail, walking more. Yeah, e-bikes, planning ahead, stop driving. Carpooling, of course. Yeah, that's a good one. Let's see. Well, the hardest part is convincing others to not drive, especially when it's raining. hard to do around here.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, giving up one day a week from driving. One person gave up the car entirely, and it's helped them with their mental health as well. All right.
Okay, well, we'll just go ahead and look at the next one. So one of the things is that with our climate, that I love this. This is actually from the Seattle strike that was taken in the before times when we could actually gather. And I love this poster that says there is no planet B. I've seen another one that says there is no plan B. And one of these things that we've seen in the youth panel as well is that young people have passion and a sense of urgency. You know, I have two adult children in their mid-30s, and neither of them are going to have children. So this is sort of an issue that, and it's because of climate change. So
yeah, that's youth have really stepped up because it's, you know, people our age, Sarah, we're at the end of our life, but the point is we all need to step up, right? It's not just the youth's responsibility. The other day I was listening to a TED Talk with Catherine Hayhoe, who is a climate scientist, and she said, gave the statistic that 70% of the people in the US agree that the climate is changing and that it's harmful to us and the animals and etc. But she said when it comes down to it, only two-thirds of the people say they never talk about climate change. So although we say that we know it's happening, we don't talk about it. And then she's mentioned that even 3/4 of the people say they never even hear it mentioned in the media. And then she went on in her talk to talk about just the importance of talking about climate to the circle of friends you have and your family. She said that we might have different opinions when it comes to politics, might be Democrats, Republicans, et cetera, but invariably we have shared values, something like family, our community, gardening, our kids' future. So for example, in the Northwest here, our environment, we really have a shared value amongst those things, our mountains, our streams, our fresh air. This is our shared value. And what she says is that once we find our common shared value, all we need to do is connect the dots as to why working on climate change is important. You know, we don't need to be climate scientists and know all of the data to make a difference. We just need to realize that we care. And then from there, we begin to take action. And sometimes that journey begins with a simple thing like a conversation.
So one of the questions is, maybe the question is, who are you going to talk to about climate? Nobody.
Nobody, did anybody say anything?
Well, I'm talking to my kids about climate all the time. And
Yeah. So we got my children, the people you're with, family members, all of you, my students, friends, family, local government, city council, legislators, people who aren't already on board, friends, family, folks at church, anyone who will listen, museum visitors.
Yeah, I think it's great to that I'm going to try to do more of too, because I tried this. I actually went out and talked the very beginnings of all this when I didn't even know what an atmosphere was. I just talked to my neighbors about it. And I think one thing I'm going to try to do different or extend is to talk to somebody who doesn't necessarily have the same political beliefs or that I have, and for us to find that commonality and then try to connect the dots, because then it's stretching me also in another way.
Mhm. Okay, well, I think this sort of climate conversation was a way of having us talk to you a little bit about how we get engaged and how even doing one little thing, talking or, adding a different native plant to your garden, those are all making a difference and they're all critically important. I want to just pull the curtain on that for a second and just remind you that one thing is that all of this is being recorded, so you will be able to, and we will send it out to you and make it available on Third Place and in other places as well. And that I'm going to shift over to Brian, who's going to talk a little bit about what the breakout rooms are. And what the breakout rooms are, you'll have two opportunities to go to a variety of any different breakout rooms. One's on e-bikes, one's on e-vehicles, weatherizing, forest stewardship, recycling, and what you should be reading. So Brian.
All right, I just had to let the dogs out. But yeah, so essentially, are we ready to go? Is it 12:20 yet?
It's not 12:20, but I thought that might be a little prelude about how people get into their groups and stuff.
Okay, so what's going to happen is I believe Amy Wittenberg will set up or open up a whole bunch of different things that you'll see on your screen. If you go to the breakout room session, you should be able to scroll down. You'll see all the people that are in the Zoom chat, but you should be able to scroll down and be able to see all the different rooms that you could go to, and you can click on one and enter it when it's open, and you can stay for that talk, or I believe you can even bug out if you want to try and get to another group. But we will have two sessions. Now, after you've been in one of the sessions, what's going to happen is that we will automatically pull you out, so you don't need to pull yourself out of that. And then when we do the second session, you can go to visit another breakout room. Now, when it actually gives you that option the second time, it'll ask you if you want to return to the same session that you were there for the first time, and all you have to do is just decline that. So you want to just decline that, and then you'll have the option to go into one of the other rooms. I think that's the way it's going to work. So do we have now access to the breakout rooms? You should see it if you click on breakout rooms. Again, you'll have to scroll all the way down because you'll see everybody there. And you should see an e-bikes, tech, and climate solutions. You should see an e-vehicles working group. The how to talk to friends about recycling, home weatherizations, forest stewardships, and reading through the climate crisis. So I believe that reading through the climate crisis is about literature on climate change. So something that would be fun for those of you who want to read about things. So you guys can choose which one you want, and we'll see you on the other end.
Let's do it.
Well, all right, everybody. I just wanted to finish up today with a little bit of a wrap up. I think we can say that this has been an amazing conference. We've had visits from our representatives to tell us about policies that are going to be enacted for the future and what is being enacted now. We've had some wonderful speakers to tell us about the anxiety, accepting the anxiety of climate change and using that into powerful messages and positive messages. And we've even talked about ways in which we can be more of a force and to be more of a voice that can talk to the youth people and get the youth charged up, or get the youth to charge us up. No pun intended with the electrification with Heather's talk. But we are in the midst of greatness, I think. We are in the midst of solutions and people who are ready for action. And I just wanted to say thank you to all of our speakers. I want to say thank you to Representative Duerr and for her visit, and to all those wonderful panelists who were in part of our breakout sessions, and all the wonderful time that they've now volunteered to tell us about their products or about their environmentally friendly ways of going into the future. It really has been a wonderful thing. And Amy, if I'm correct, this will be recorded and available for people to rewatch, or even to recommend to have others who couldn't be here to watch. And are you going to provide us with that URL?
Well, we will post it on our YouTube site, and when it's there, it'll be on the Third Place Commons YouTube channel. We can also share it out, but and then we'll link to it on the event website, which is the webpage, which is on our Third Place Commons site, which is I've linked to a couple times in chat and can put in again before we go. So we'll post the link to the video there as well once it's uploaded and ready to roll. But it won't include the breakout sessions, but the parts before and after will be there.
Wonderful. And that I know I have to rewatch some of those presentations again just to get the full meaning of what was presented. Sarah Phillips, any last minute thoughts from you or from anybody who is on the climate action group that would like to chime in at this point in time?
Well, I'd just like to thank everybody for this incredible support, and appreciate everything you've done, and we'll see what happens next.
Yeah, and thank you to Third Place Books or Third Place Commons for hosting us and doing this again for the second year, and hopefully we'll have a third year next year to continue the rally, to continue the charge and the calling. Any thoughts from anybody else who's joined our session and would like to?
Yes, Brian, this is
Yes.
Linda Holman.
Linda, go ahead.
From the Climate Action. I really am astonished at how much information I've learned in these sessions, and just was in a breakout session with someone I knew from Rotary about forest stewardship. It's just been wonderful, and I'm so grateful that I was able to even be a small part of being involved here, because I think this has been an outstanding event.
I agree.
And I want to thank Sarah for all her sweat and anxiety that pulled it all off in a marvelous way one more time.
Right.
Absolutely.
I'm so glad that you can go, anything that has less than a teaspoon of water in it can be recycled. That will give me back 5 hours a week. I've been waiting and waiting for any moisture inside my cat food can. And so I'm just excited. Thank you, Sarah.
Anyone else? Well, with that, I would like to wish everybody again another happy Earth weekend, and continue the fight, continue the efforts.
But before everybody leaves, can we just give a big hand to Brian for emceeing this whole thing? It's not an
Absolutely.
easy job.
Here, here.
Yeah.
Here, here.
Yes,
Thank you.
absolutely. Wonderful, wonderful.
Well, all right, everybody. Well, I guess we'll convene at some other time.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Everybody
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
for joining us. See you at the farmer's market.